Disclaimer, this content is fictionalized recreation for entertainment and educational purposes only, not factual reporting. Viewer discretion advised.
My dear friends, I'm Grace Thompson, and tonight we embark on a comprehensive exploration of one of America's most enduring criminal mysteries, the case of the Zodiac Killer. This story has captivated investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts for over 5 decades, not merely because of the brutal nature of the murders, but due to the sophisticated psychological warfare conducted through complex coded messages, deliberately taunting letters, and the killer's remarkable ability to manipulate both law enforcement procedures and media dynamics. What renders this case particularly compelling is that despite one of the most extensive and resource-intensive manhunts in American criminal history, the Zodiac's true identity remains shrouded in mystery, his narrative frustratingly incomplete, his victims and their families still awaiting long-delayed justice and closure. Our detailed journey begins in the seemingly tranquil communities of late 1960s Northern California, where a series of coordinated violent attacks would permanently transform how law enforcement agencies approach serial criminal investigations. The first officially confirmed Zodiac attack occurred on the cold evening of December 20th, 1968, at Lake Herman Road, a notoriously secluded lovers' lane situated near the industrial city of Vallejo. 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Faraday had driven to this remote location around 10 p.m. seeking private conversation away from parental supervision and the prying eyes of their community. What began as an ordinary teenage date night rapidly descended into unimaginable horror when another vehicle deliberately pulled alongside theirs in the darkness. The precise sequence of events that immediately followed remains partially obscured by time and conflicting evidence, but the devastating outcome was horrifyingly clear to arriving officers. Both teenagers had been shot multiple times at extremely close range with a semi-automatic weapon. David died instantly from a single, carefully placed gunshot wound to the right side of his head, while Betty Lou was discovered approximately 30 feet from their vehicle, having been shot 5 times in her back, while apparently attempting to desperately flee the scene. Crime scene investigators meticulously documented several crucial details that would later assume tremendous significance in the evolving investigation. No personal property had been stolen from either victim or their vehicle. Comprehensive examination revealed no evidence of sexual assault or struggle, and the recovered shell casings consistently indicated the use of a specific type of semi-automatic handgun. This wasn't a robbery that had tragically escalated nor a conventional crime of passion. This appeared to be methodically planned, cold-blooded murder committed for its own disturbing sake, marking the terrifying emergence of a new kind of criminal in American society. The initial police investigation struggled considerably to identify meaningful leads or develop a coherent investigative direction. Reliable witnesses were virtually non-existent in the remote location. Physical forensic evidence remained limited and frustratingly ambiguous, and the underlying motive behind these brutal killings remained completely elusive to experienced detectives who had investigated numerous homicides. For 7 long months, the case grew increasingly cold until the evening of July 4th, 1969, when the killer dramatically resurfaced in Vallejo, this time selecting the parking lot of the Blue Rock Springs Golf Course as his hunting ground. 22-year-old Darlene Farron, a young mother with a small child at home, and 19-year-old Michael Mageau were engaged in conversation inside a blue Chevrolet Corvair around midnight when another vehicle slowly pulled alongside theirs. The driver emerged without warning, immediately shining an intensely bright flashlight directly into their stunned eyes before opening rapid fire with what was later ballistically determined to be a 9mm Luger pistol. Darlene was killed instantly, shot multiple times at point-blank range, but Michael miraculously survived despite suffering 4 critical gunshot wounds that would leave him permanently disabled. The fundamental attack pattern closely mirrored the Lake Herman Road killings in several key aspects, but this time there emerged a crucial difference that would permanently alter the investigation's trajectory. Approximately 40 minutes following the shooting, an anonymous male caller with a calm, measured voice contacted the Vallejo Police Department dispatch, clearly claiming responsibility for both the Blue Rock Springs attack and the previous Lake Herman Road murders. The voice on the telephone stated with eerie, unnerving composure, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, You will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year.
Goodbye.
This deliberately placed phone call marked the definitive beginning of the Zodiac's systematic communication strategy with authorities and his calculated emergence as a sophisticated media-conscious criminal who thoroughly understood the psychological power of terror and public manipulation. The investigation experienced its most dramatic evolution on August 1, 1969, when three major San Francisco Bay Area newspapers, the influential San Francisco Chronicle, the widely circulated San Francisco Examiner, and the local Vallejo Times-Herald, received nearly identical handwritten letters through the United States Postal Service. Each carefully prepared letter contained exactly one-third of an elaborate 408-symbol cryptographic cipher and a chilling narrative that began with the now-historic words, "Dear Editor, I am the killer of the two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman Road. I have become very upset with the police for their telling lies about me. So I shall have to change my way of collecting slaves for my afterlife." The letters were ceremoniously signed with a distinctive cross-circle symbol that would become the killer's criminal signature, the infamous Zodiac symbol. The complex cipher itself was successfully cracked within 1 week by Donald Hardin, a dedicated high school teacher from Salinas, and his equally determined wife Betty, who worked tirelessly through multiple nights to decode the mysterious cryptographic symbols using systematic frequency analysis and pattern recognition. The deciphered message began with the now immortal words that would echo through criminal history. "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all." The remainder of the solved cipher contained increasingly rambling philosophical statements about paradise, slavery, and afterlife mythology, revealing a killer possessing both profound grandiosity and a deeply twisted worldview that combined elements of nihilism with a bizarre personal cosmology. The Zodiac's next carefully orchestrated attack demonstrated his rapidly evolving criminal methodology and significantly increasing operational boldness. On September 27, 1969, at the famously picturesque Lake Berryessa in Napa County's wine country, 22-year-old Brian Hartnell and 20-year-old Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a peaceful afternoon picnic on a particularly remote section of the lake's tree-lined shore. Around 6:30 p.m., as daylight began fading, they noticed a solitary male figure approaching deliberately from approximately 400 yards distance across an open field. What rendered this specific encounter uniquely terrifying was the killer's deliberate theatricality and costuming. He wore a professionally constructed black executioner's hood with the Zodiac symbol carefully stitched onto the chest area, creating a genuinely frightening spectacle clearly designed to maximize psychological terror and create lasting traumatic memories. He approached the unsuspecting couple while claiming to be an escaped convict from the notorious Deer Lodge prison in Montana who desperately needed their vehicle and money to facilitate his escape to Mexico. After successfully gaining their temporary cooperation through this elaborate fictional narrative, he efficiently produced pre-measured lengths of white clothesline and methodically proceeded to tie them up using elaborate, practiced bindings. Once both victims were completely secured and helpless, his conversational demeanor transformed dramatically from superficially pleasant to overtly murderous. He systematically stabbed them multiple times with a large hunting knife, inflicting numerous deep wounds on both victims' torsos and backs. Before conclusively leaving the blood-soaked scene, he used a black felt tip marker to meticulously draw his signature cross-circle symbol on the driver's side door of Hartnell's white 1960 Volkswagen Karmann Ghia and carefully inscribed the specific dates of his previous attacks. Vallejo/12-20-68/7-4-69 followed by September 27-69-6:30, directly beneath the symbol. Cecilia Shepard would tragically succumb to her extensive injuries 2 days later at nearby Queen of the Valley Hospital, but Brian Hartnell miraculously survived to provide investigators with remarkably detailed descriptions of his attacker's physical appearance, speech patterns, vocal qualities, and distinctive mannerisms that would prove instrumental in creating the famous police composite sketches that circulated nationally, perhaps the most audacious of the Zodiac's confirmed attacks. Occurred on October 11, 1969, within San Francisco's affluent Presidio Heights neighborhood, an area known for its elegant Victorian homes and high-profile residents. 29-year-old cab driver Paul Stine, a popular local figure known for his friendly demeanor, had picked up a fare in the city's bustling theater district around 9:30 p.m. and was directed to proceed to the intersection of Washington and Maple Streets. Upon reaching the specified destination, the passenger without warning shot Stine once in the head at point-blank range using a .22 caliber handgun, then meticulously wiped down the cab's entire interior surfaces to remove potential fingerprints before deliberately cutting away a section of Stine's blood-saturated shirt to retain as a personal trophy. This particular crime would assume crucial importance in the ongoing investigation because, for the very first time, there were multiple independent eyewitnesses who clearly observed the killer calmly departing the murder scene. Several teenagers residing in an adjacent house watched through their front window as a white male of average height and medium build methodically wiped down the taxi's exterior surfaces before walking away northward without any apparent urgency or concern about detection. Tragically, due to a catastrophic communication breakdown between responding police departments, uniformed officers actually stopped and briefly questioned a male individual closely matching the detailed description in close proximity to the crime scene but inexplicably released him after superficial questioning, never realizing they had just encountered the prime suspect in California's most wanted investigation. This profoundly missed opportunity would haunt participating investigators for decades and represented arguably the most frustrating near capture in modern American criminal history, a pivotal moment that might have potentially ended the Zodiac's reign of terror before it could escalate further and claim additional victims. The Zodiac's ongoing correspondence with major newspapers and multiple police departments continued intensively throughout 1969 and well into 1970, becoming progressively more elaborate, detailed, and psychologically taunting in both tone and content. He dispatched numerous letters containing specific, non-public crime scene details that only the actual perpetrator could possibly know, accompanied by increasingly sophisticated cryptographic ciphers that he theatrically claimed would conclusively reveal his true identity once properly solved. His second major cryptographic communication, known universally as the 340-character cipher due to its precise length, would remain stubbornly unbroken for 51 years until it was finally deciphered in December 2020 by an international team of 3 determined private citizens: David Oranchak, an experienced web developer from Virginia, Sam Blake, a professional mathematician from Australia, and Jarl van Eyck, an innovative Belgian software engineer. The successfully decoded message revealingly stated, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." This particular cipher, consistent with his previous communications, vividly illustrated the killer's profound grandiosity and his apparent sincere belief in an elaborate personal afterlife mythology where his murdered victims would somehow serve him throughout eternity. Providing criminal psychologists with valuable insights into the deeply disturbed psychological framework that potentially drove his violent actions and meticulous planning. One of the most persistently disturbing aspects of the entire Zodiac case remains his repeated, detailed claims of having murdered as many as 37 victims across Northern California, though official law enforcement authorities have only been able to conclusively confirm 7 separate attacks resulting in 5 documented fatalities. In one of his most extensively analyzed letters to the San Francisco Chronicle's editorial department, he wrote with characteristic arrogance and superiority, "I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay Area. The SF police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise." His various communications frequently included technically detailed diagrams of explosive devices he claimed to have constructed and very specific, credible threats to attack public school buses carrying children, which generated widespread community panic and necessitated dramatically increased police presence at educational institutions throughout the entire San Francisco Bay Area. His sophisticated understanding of contemporary media dynamics was remarkably advanced for that historical period. He demonstrated precise knowledge of newspaper publication deadlines, understood how to strategically play different police jurisdictions against each other, and mastered the art of maintaining his visibility in public consciousness through carefully timed communications that guaranteed his story would remain front-page news for extended periods, thereby amplifying his psychological impact on the general population. The sprawling investigation into the Zodiac killings eventually involved numerous separate law enforcement agencies operating across multiple California counties, creating significant coordination challenges that likely substantially hampered the investigation during its most critical early phases, when the killer remained most active and potentially vulnerable to detection. The Vallejo Police Department, Solano County Sheriff's Office, Napa County Sheriff's Office, and San Francisco Police Department all worked somewhat independently on different aspects of the developing case, often with limited systematic information sharing between jurisdictions due to both technological limitations of the era and deeply ingrained interagency rivalries and territorial disputes. This investigative fragmentation occurred largely before the establishment of modern computerized database systems and instant communication networks that today enable different law enforcement entities to rapidly share crucial information about ongoing major investigations. The absence of a centralized coordination database meant that potentially vital connections between related cases might be overlooked, and precious investigative resources were frequently wasted navigating bureaucratic coordination challenges between departments that often maintained different operational priorities, evidence handling procedures, and competing institutional interests that sometimes superseded collaborative investigation. Across subsequent decades, numerous individuals have been seriously investigated as potential Zodiac suspects by both official law enforcement agencies and dedicated amateur researchers, with the most persistently compelling being Arthur Lee Allen, a former school teacher from Vallejo who initially came to police attention in 1971 after being reported by a concerned friend who privately suspected he might be the mysterious Zodiac Killer. The accumulated circumstantial evidence against Allen was undeniably substantial and intriguing. He closely matched the general physical description provided by surviving witnesses, legally owned firearms similar to those believed used in the attacks, had a documented history of disturbing behavior that included previous child molestation convictions, and could be circumstantially placed near several crime scenes around the approximate times of the attacks through witness statements and partial documentation. Most intriguingly, Allen reportedly owned a distinctive wristwatch bearing the Zodiac symbol and made several suspicious, incriminating statements to various acquaintances about his unusual interest in the ongoing case and specific knowledge of crime details. However, despite extensive official investigation and periodic surveillance, conclusive physical evidence definitively linking him to the specific crimes remained frustratingly elusive throughout. Handwriting exemplars never successfully matched the Zodiac letters despite multiple expert examinations, and when advanced DNA testing technology became available years later, it also ultimately failed to forensically connect him to the crimes through biological evidence. Allen died in 1992 from congestive heart failure at age 58 without ever being formally charged with any Zodiac-related offenses, leaving generations of investigators and amateur researchers deeply divided about his potential involvement, a vigorous debate that continues actively today with persuasive arguments and evidence presented on both sides of the controversy. Other significantly investigated suspects across the decades have included Richard Gajkowski, a newspaper employee with documented connections to several victims through the vibrant counterculture scene, Lawrence Kane, an international merchant marine with professional knowledge of cryptography and whose extensive travel patterns could potentially explain chronological gaps in the attack timeline, and Ross Sullivan, a mentally unstable individual who bore a striking resemblance to the official police composite sketch and had a thoroughly documented history of violent behavior and psychiatric institutionalization. Each major suspect generated intriguing circumstantial evidence suggesting possible involvement, but none could be definitively connected to all the confirmed crimes through unambiguous physical evidence or incontrovertible documentation that would meet legal standards for prosecution. The Zodiac case technically remains officially open in several California jurisdictions, though active professional investigation has substantially decreased over recent years as original investigators have retired or passed away. Key witnesses have become unavailable, and limited law enforcement resources have been necessarily reallocated to more recent violent crimes with better prospects for successful resolution and prosecution. The profound cultural impact of the Zodiac Killer has been both extensive and remarkably enduring, significantly influencing everything from modern criminal investigation procedures to mainstream popular culture representations of serial killers in media. His complex crimes have inspired countless books, documentary films, television specials, and podcast series, most notably the critically acclaimed 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, which meticulously recreated the investigation's chronology and helped introduce the case to an entirely new generation of true crime enthusiasts. The Zodiac investigation also prompted substantial changes in how law enforcement agencies approach complex serial crimes, highlighting the critical necessity for improved interagency communication protocols and emphasizing the importance of properly preserving physical evidence for future technological advances that might solve cold cases decades after the original crimes. The Zodiac's sophisticated manipulation of mass media outlets foreshadowed later criminals who would increasingly use television, newspapers, and eventually digital platforms to amplify their messages and propagate social fear, effectively establishing an operational template that would be extensively studied by both law enforcement professionals and, unfortunately, by future violent offenders seeking similar notoriety. What renders the Zodiac case particularly fascinating to professional criminologists and dedicated amateur researchers alike is the compelling combination of the killer's apparent above-average intelligence, his demonstrable understanding of contemporary investigative techniques and forensic limitations, and his mysterious ability to simply vanish from public visibility after his concentrated 1968 to 1969 attack period. Unlike many serial offenders who are eventually apprehended due to recognizable patterns in their criminal behavior or crucial operational mistakes, the Zodiac seemed to abruptly cease his killing activities after 1969, with his last confirmed communication occurring in 1974 before descending into complete silence. This unexplained cessation has generated numerous competing theories regarding his ultimate fate. Some researchers theorize he was eventually arrested for unrelated crimes and imprisoned under different identities. Others suggest he possibly died from natural causes, accidental death, or suicide. Additional theories propose he may have relocated internationally, experienced a profound religious conversion, or was long-term institutionalized for serious mental health conditions. Another plausible possibility is that he deliberately decided to terminate his criminal activities and successfully resumed an anonymous civilian existence, personally satisfied with the substantial terror he had already generated and the legendary status he had carefully cultivated through his meticulously constructed public persona and media strategy. Contemporary forensic technology continues to offer renewed hope for potentially solving this decades-old mystery that has frustrated multiple generations of professional investigators. Recent advances in DNA analysis techniques, digital fingerprint enhancement technology, and computerized cryptographic analysis have all been systematically applied to the case with varying degrees of promising results. In 2018, the Vallejo Police Department publicly announced they were submitting envelopes containing potential Zodiac biological evidence to a specialized private laboratory for advanced genetic analysis using sophisticated techniques that were unimaginable when the original crimes occurred. Simultaneously, dedicated amateur cryptographers and true crime research communities continue to intensively analyze the remaining unsolved portions of the Zodiac's various communications, perpetually hoping to identify the crucial breakthrough clue that might finally reveal his long-concealed identity. The revolutionary development of investigative genetic genealogy, which has successfully resolved numerous previously unsolvable cold cases in recent years by matching crime scene DNA to extensive family tree databases, offers particularly significant promise for potentially identifying the Zodiac through minute biological evidence that has been carefully preserved for decades in climate-controlled evidence storage facilities. The enduring legacy of the Zodiac Killer extends far beyond the specific criminal acts he committed, representing a fundamental paradigm shift in how contemporary society understands serial violent offenders and how modern law enforcement coordinates complex multi-jurisdictional major case investigations. The Zodiac wasn't merely a murderer. He functioned as a meticulous performance artist specializing in psychological terror, a master manipulator who thoroughly comprehended the societal power of fear and the mass media's role in dramatically amplifying that fear throughout the general population. He successfully created his own dark personal mythology and ingeniously invited the entire nation to participate in his deadly narrative through his cryptic ciphers and taunting letters, effectively transforming himself from a mere criminal into an almost mythological figure in American popular culture. His crimes occur during a period of profound social transformation and upheaval in the United States, and in many significant ways, he came to publicly represent the dark underside of the idealized California dream, the beautiful coastal paradise that could suddenly, violently turn deadly without any warning. The specific timing of his crimes, during the celebrated Summer of Love and the vibrant height of the 1960s counterculture movement, substantially amplified their psychological impact on the national consciousness, dramatically demonstrating that profound darkness could intrude even into the most seemingly idyllic settings, and that genuine evil could wear an utterly ordinary, unremarkable human face. However, amidst all the complex cryptographic puzzles, the numerous police composite sketches, the endless forensic analysis, and the perpetual theoretical speculation, we must never lose sight of the profound human tragedy underlying the Zodiac's crimes. 5 confirmed human lives were brutally terminated prematurely, and countless other individuals, grieving family members, traumatized friends, horrified witnesses, and entire communities were permanently scarred by these violent events. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were typical teenagers with their entire adult lives awaiting them, personal dreams unfulfilled, individual potentials forever unrealized. Darlene Ferrin was a young mother with a small child who would inevitably grow up without ever truly knowing her biological parent. Cecilia Shepard was a bright, promising college student with ambitious dreams and professional aspirations that would never be actualized. Paul Stein was a hard-working, respectable cab driver simply performing his daily employment duties to adequately support his family. These were genuine people with authentic lives, meaningful relationships, personal hopes, and understandable fears, not merely anonymous entries in cold case files or historical footnotes in true crime literature. Their surviving families have patiently waited for decades for definitive answers, for psychological closure, for the basic human knowledge of who deliberately took their loved ones from them, and for what possible reason. As we continue to diligently search for conclusive answers all these years later, we meaningfully honor these victims by resolutely refusing to let their personal stories be forgotten, by consciously acknowledging that behind every cryptic symbol and every official police report, there existed real human beings whose individual lives mattered profoundly and whose cherished memories deserve to be treated with permanent dignity and respect. The persistent pursuit of justice in the Zodiac case continues quietly but determinately, even after all these subsequent decades, because certain fundamental truths inherently demand to be uncovered, regardless of how much chronological time has elapsed. The professional dedication of multiple generations of law enforcement personnel who have worked this complex case across their careers, the relentlessly curious nature of amateur investigative communities, and the dogged persistence of journalists, authors, and documentary filmmakers have collectively maintained this investigation within public awareness for over half a century. Each new technological innovation brings renewed hope that this enduring mystery might finally reach resolution, that the Zodiac's concealed identity might be conclusively revealed to society, and that some meaningful measure of belated justice and emotional closure might ultimately be delivered to the victims' families who have waited so extensively and patiently. Until that potentially transformative day arrives, the case technically remains officially open in multiple jurisdictions. The investigation continues in various evolving forms, and the watching world patiently awaits the ultimate answer to one of criminal history's most persistently haunting and enigmatic questions: who is the Zodiac Killer? Thank you for accompanying me through this detailed examination of an important chapter in American criminal history, and for honoring the enduring memories of those individuals whose lives were so tragically and prematurely interrupted. Their collective stories powerfully remind us that behind every cold case file and every unsolved mystery, there exist unique human beings who fundamentally deserve to be remembered not primarily for how they died, but for how they actually lived, loved, and dreamed during their tragically shortened lifetimes.